Hey guys, welcome back. Today we're talking about topic 3.5, the Second Amendment's right to bear arms. In this lesson, you will learn about how court decisions on the Second Amendment have rested on its constitutional interpretations of individual liberty. So first, let's look at the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment says, a well-regulated militia, being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. It's a little backwards, but based on the cases that we're about to look at, we're going to clearly see how the court focuses on the first clause in the early years and then moves into focusing on the second clause, starting in the 21st century. So let's take a look. Let's talk about three early cases in regard to the Second Amendment. The first we're going to look at is the United States versus Cruikshank from 1873. So this is after the Civil War, and it ended up saying that the Second Amendment did not apply to the individual and was not for protection against state laws. So the court here was denying to incorporate the Second Amendment to the states. They basically said the Second Amendment is not meant to protect the individual from the state. It is meant to protect the right of the state to raise a militia. In the case of Presser versus Illinois in 1886, it said that the Second Amendment, again, only applied to militias that can be regulated by states. So they were focusing on that part where it says a well-regulated militia. In the only case to be heard by the court in the 20th century, U.S. versus Miller in 1939, it said that only guns that could be part of a militia reasonably were protected. Part of this case is still used to ban certain weapons today. So 1939, only guns that could reasonably be used in a militia are protected by the Second Amendment. So that takes us from the court saying, hey, it's all about militias, it is not about individual liberties, to 2008 in the case of DC versus Heller. And in this case, the court shifts and they say, you know what? It is about individual liberty. But first, what is individual liberty? Individual liberty is the individual freedom from the constraints of governmental control. So what happens in DC versus Heller? In the case of DC versus Heller, the District of Columbia, Washington, D.C., had a ban on handguns. Now, it's important to note here that the District of Columbia is not a state. And so in the case of DC versus Heller, the Second Amendment cannot be incorporated to the states because DC is not a state. But the court ruled that the ban on handguns in the District of Columbia was unconstitutional. The court decided that the Second Amendment guarantees an individual right to gun ownership, which the federal government, through the District of Columbia, could not infringe. And they said laws from the 1600s and 1700s uphold the ruling. Now, there were a couple of things that the court did observe. All right, so the right to a gun is not absolute, even in DC versus Heller. And so there were three things that the court said that apply here. First, this applies only to weapons in common use. So it really only applied to handguns here. So very much like in that previous case where we talked about how only guns that were able to be used for militias were covered, in this case, it only really applied to handguns. Second, the government may still impose reasonable regulations. So that would be things like prohibiting bump stocks and prohibiting guns in sensitive places like schools or churches. The court also noted that in its ruling in Heller that it was not a decision that applied directly to state and local gun regulations. This was only for the District of Columbia as a federal government institution. Again, can't be incorporated to the states because DC is not a state. We are going to talk, however, in a later topic about a case that does incorporate the individual liberties portion of the Second Amendment to the states. So make sure that you're tuned in for that one. In this lesson, you should have learned how court decisions on the Second Amendment have rested on its constitutional interpretations of individual liberty. At this point, if there's anything you missed, go back through the video and rewatch that part now. Then, when you're done, answer the summarizing question in your notes so that you can get a stamp the next time we're in class. All right, guys, we'll see you later. Bye.